Good morning, everybody, and welcome to day 2 of the IRENA Innovation Week 2023. Today we're actually going to be focusing on indirect electrification, so how we actually deal with those hard-to-abate sectors. One of the things for those of you who weren't here yesterday is that during the moderated discussion, you'll be able to ask questions of the panel, and you do that through Slido. You don't have to download anything, just click on, it's all browser-based. The other thing I was going to say is today, could you again be very careful about wearing your badges everywhere? Yesterday the museum was closed, but today it's actually got visitors, so we do need to be able to tell everyone apart. At the same time, I urge you to take advantage of the fact we're in a beautiful art museum. Apparently there's a mouse in the wall somewhere, but I haven't been able to find it yet. So if you see it, let me know. The first session is called Walking the Last Mile of the Energy Transition with Green Hydrogen. This session is in partnership with the OECD, and we're going to look at innovation in green hydrogen and how it can help decarbonise those hard-to-abate sectors, because it's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. How do we use renewable electricity to do that? How do we keep the infrastructure reliable and stable? What it boils down to is what's the realistic role of green hydrogen in the energy transition? So our first keynote speaker this morning is from IRENA. It's Francisco Boschel, who's the head of innovation and end-use applications. He's been working with IRENA since 2012 and leads their work on policy and technical advice and systemic innovation.
Thank you very much, Felicia, and welcome, good morning, everyone, to another exciting day of Innovation Week. So, green hydrogen, not an energy source indeed, an energy carrier. And what it would carry? Renewable electricity. How much? Well, you heard yesterday, we consider that would be around 40% of the total final energy consumption by 2050. So it's still not the king of the carriers. The king of the carriers will continue to be direct electricity, 3 times more than green hydrogen. But green hydrogen, anyway, has an important role to play for those so-called hard-to-abate sectors. How much electrolyzers we would need? Well, first of all, the demand for hydrogen may grow 6 times to what we have currently, around 90 million tons per year, to around 530 million tons by 2050, and that would require more than 5,000 gigawatts of electrolyzer capacity. Important to mention the dynamic of these projections. For example, last year, we expected by 2050 more than 600 million tons by 2050. Now it's a little bit reduced. Why is that? Because technology continues to progress. Now, for example, we can directly electrify electric trucks, and it's making strides in the market, higher temperature heat pumps. So we see that these projections on hydrogen demand are quite dynamic. Another interesting thing is that last year we thought that it might be around 70-75% green and around 25 to 30% blue. Now, in our new projections, we see that around 94% would be green and only about 6% blue. And why is that? Just looking at the market trends. We have now, at least in the first quarter, up to the first quarter of this year, more than 400 green hydrogen projects around the globe, and just a little bit more than 20 blue hydrogen. So it's clear that the market is moving more into one direction than the other. So we have to keep in mind that these trends are dynamic. So let's start with supply. What is driving innovation on supply? Well, first of all, the amount of electricity that would be needed to produce all this green hydrogen is massive. So by 2050, we may need around 25,000 terawatt hours of electricity. That's more or less the whole electricity we consume in the planet today, just to produce green hydrogen by 2050. And of course also the amount of electricity that would be needed, or the green hydrogen that should be produced at the lowest cost, so we still need innovation to reduce the cost of the electrolyzers, but also the efficiency. Just 1% increase in efficiency of electrolyzers will save us around 120 gigawatts by 2050. That's the total installed capacity of a country like Spain. Just 1% increase in efficiency of the electrolyzers. In terms of the peak demand, more than 5,000 gigawatts, many of those might be captive energy, so directly where the hydrogen is produced, not through the grid, but a lot will be through the grid. And how can these new peak loads be managed by the system? And then the other part is, okay, then let's make them become a flexibility providers. And that's possible. Technology, we will hear later, electrolyzers can now be more flexible, even alkaline ones wrapping up, wrapping down faster. But the issue is that we need innovation in business model, because the business for them is to produce hydrogen, not to provide services to the grid. So how can we find a way that they are compensated in a way that can really open the door to create a business case to produce enough green hydrogen, but also to provide these services to the grid and be compensated? Okay, let's move from supply to trade. So we see in our analysis that around 1/4 of the hydrogen that would be needed by 2050 would be traded. So the vast majority will be produced close to demand. But anyway, around 1/4, so it means around 130 million tons might be traded. And out of that 130, more or less 50% might be done through pipelines, so not so far from the demand, and the other 50% through overseas in ships. So what is driving innovation? So let's talk about pipelines, around 70 million tons in pipelines. Now we see some countries saying, okay, the existing pipelines we have from natural gas can transport hydrogen. Others say, I am not so sure if they can transport hydrogen. And the academia said, look, you have to be very careful, because one thing is to say the material you have the use in your pipelines is good to transport hydrogen, but another is to use existing pipelines which may have cracks, effect of corrosion, etc. You will have embrittlement, you have more fatigue. So still more innovation is needed to understand and mitigate those risks. Then 60 million tons by ship. But of course, what kind of carrier we will be using? Ammonia, methanol, liquefied organic hydrogen as a carrier. Everyone requires different temperature, different pressure to be compressed, different type of storage technologies, systems, etc. So we need to plan. But what do we plan? So we need to be clearer on how, what this market would look like, how we will address this planning. So we need to innovate also in better ways to plan this infrastructure. And the third point is, of course, we need to trade really low carbon hydrogen, and how we ensure that with certification. But we see, for example, something important is that hydrogen is different than oil. Oil is like an oligopoly where you have few producers and many consumers. So the producers can set a high price. But green hydrogen, we see very few regions willing to, or with the necessity to import, and many willing to export. That's an oligopsony. So basically, the few importers can set a lower price, yeah? While you have many willing or expecting to actually make business and export. So we see emergence, for example, of regional certification schemes. But what is the value of a regional certification scheme in a region where everyone wants to export and no one wants to import? So what is really needed is harmonization at global level, especially with these few markets, mainly three, EU, Japan, South Korea at the moment, because all the others want to export. So how do we address this while also ensuring the environmental integrity? Now let's move to the demand. So of course the big expectation is in PTX services, also products. We see the demand mainly for the chemical, iron, shipping, and aviation. Certainly we see that hydrogen might not be needed, certainly for road transport, even trucks, residential and commercial heating at low temperature, even mid-temperature, not really. But we will need this PTX still in very important sectors, including the chemical, shipping, aviation, steel and iron, etc. So more than 315 million tons of green hydrogen for this PTX. But then how do we pull the demand for those to compensate the competitiveness of those? So we need instruments, procurement instruments. Now we see the auctions, but they are asking, okay, should they be linked to inflation or not? We saw what happened in the UK. So there are still innovation to be done on how we create these mechanisms, and we define these mechanisms. Synthetic fuels, a big question is, okay, you can have all the renewable electricity and green hydrogen, but they need the carbon molecule. And carbon, we have plenty, but how to capture and ensure that the final product will be low carbon, that's a different story. So direct air capture is still not really commercially competitive, commercially available. We have biogenic carbon that it would be ideal, but we see very few countries actually doing an inventory of their bio facilities, how they can capture this carbon and create a new business model to actually use this carbon in the production of this synthetic fuel. So still a lot of innovation to be done in that front as well of the carbon molecule. And of course, again, the question about the infrastructure. The recipient also would need to have the needed infrastructure to receive these commodities, to transport these commodities, and also what kind of commodity? Steel, for example. Are we going to see trade of final product of steel, or are we going to see trade of hot briquetted iron? Yeah? Korea, for example, is now talking to Australia to produce hot briquette iron in Australia and then send it back to Korea to produce the steel. That's why we produce this toolbox of innovations where we touch upon all these aspects to address the issues that we mentioned before on technology, market design, regulation, system planning, and business model. 30 innovations that we consider critical to address these issues, not exhaustive, but at least some that are critical. And of course, we think that a general assessment of the sector is not so helpful. We need really to understand the different parts of the value chain of hydrogen to find the solution. We need to really understand the supply, but also the sector coupling with the power system. We need to understand the different ways to trade, technology, certification, policy mechanisms. On the demand side, what are the key areas of demand? And of course, the enabling framework. So this is what IRENA is committed to. These are just samples of some of the analysis we have publicly available. And with that, I would like to thank you. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Francisco. I'd like to introduce our next speaker for the second keynote. It's Dega Sagan, who's the Industry Program Lead at the OECD. He's going to be discussing innovation in green finance.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Francisco. I think this was a great introduction. You touched upon the technology and the regulatory aspects. I'll try to cover a bit in a few introductory remarks on the financing side. You may be curious why OECD is looking into, technology-focused topics like hydrogen and industry decarbonization, but our angle is on the financing side and on the business models especially. The work predominantly, what we do focuses on the emerging and developing economies, so the non-OECD countries where significant growth in bulk material industry is happening, as well as where hydrogen could play a key role there, where we hear a lot of project announcements. But also these countries going to play a key role also for the export markets, as we just heard from the introductory remarks of the IRENA colleagues. So it is key to understand how to scale up projects, how to reach those economies of scale, large-scale projects, and especially to understand what type of financing and also enabling condition-related solutions are needed across the entire hydrogen value chain. Starting from the renewable power, electrolyzer, maybe even producing that electrolyzer equipment. I think we'll hear more about that in the session. And then later, the production of hydrogen and its conversion to different derivatives. What are the barriers? What are the financial risks? Because it seems from all the different projects that are trying to reach a final investment decision, financing is a key challenge. You'll hear more about the insights of our work in a couple of weeks. A new report together with the World Bank Hydrogen for Development Partnership and OECD is coming, specifically focusing on financing. And I'll give a brief insight, a few learnings from that. This is an example of the importance of the hydrogen value chain. Steel production, as we hear, green steel, typically produced from the DRI electric arc furnace route, while the green hydrogen being used as an input. If you look at the capital cost, so this is not the production cost, it's the capex breakdown, you see a large share of electrolyzers and renewables. That's on the right-hand side, and that's something we know, that hydrogen production cost comprises these two elements. But then also the derivative of hydrogen production, so in this case, iron and steel production, is equally important. It's a very capital-intensive sector. That's where a big problem is lying, and how to solve that. How to unlock the private capital, and how to mobilize that private capital for these investments. This is a 1 million ton per year steel plant, so that costs about $1 billion. That's a huge investment, and given the conditions in many emerging developing economies, it's important to understand that. Now, let's think a bit step further. How are we going to discount these investments? And we hear typically weighted average cost of capital or simply the cost of capital. We've done a good survey of around 40 project developers and finance institutions, and looking mainly at the real projects and trying to understand what the cost of capital of green hydrogen projects are. The range is quite high. It's from as low as 7 to 30%. And just to simplify that range on this chart, so if you would increase the cost of capital from 10 to 20%, so just doubling it, the impact on the hydrogen production cost is by 70% increase on the final value. $3 on the left-hand side is the best project in the most optimum conditions you see today, which is happening. So that's still 3 times more expensive than the gas-based hydrogen production. How are we going to close that financing gap? That's one question. And on top of that even, as the cost of capital rises, because hydrogen is a risky business to some extent, we need to understand those risks. How are we going to de-risk the projects? So that's the second main question. We are collecting quite a number of case studies from across the world, both OECD and non-OECD countries, and trying to understand what are the success factors behind projects. And these case studies are quite deep dives. So you can find all of them on our webpage, going into the details of structure of the projects, the governance style, and so on and so forth. And a few learnings from these case studies show actually how the hydrogen sector, the current investments, especially in emerging developing economies, can be the risks, how these costs can be reduced. An important part is the offtake risk. If there is an offtake issue, it is better probably not to invest in the project. This needs to be secured. That's a key area to look into. Another part which could be important, and this applies to many emerging markets, is the risk around the currency. So this is an area where different types of insurance and guarantee type of solutions are playing a role. Important part, you see that in the gray and the green box, that's more related to the structure of the project. What's your business model? How do you share risks? We see a lot of projects where vertically integrated partnerships make a good business case because the risks are shared across that value chain picture which I've shown. And also that's important, we hear that a lot, concessional finance, so a finance with good conditions is always a solution, but we should also keep in mind it's very scarce, especially the public finance in emerging markets is very scarce. So we need to use it very strategically to mobilize the private capital. But it's a way to de-risk also the projects. And we've heard, I won't spend too much time on the slide, this is the last one, my colleague Francisco summarized it very nicely. It's actually quite a lot of interventions by the public sector will be needed to create and grow markets. We've heard of certification mechanisms, we've heard of different models to have competitive projects like auctions, even on the demand side models like public procurement, but there's a suite of solutions, including for financing. And until the financing solutions come, I think this slide shows a key message, and that is we need the right enabling conditions. If those conditions are set, most of the projects could be viable, and then if there is still a financing gap, then some public finance intervention could be helpful. So these are all my words, and look forward to the session later to discuss further. Thank you.
Thank you. Now could I ask Alicia Eastman, who's the President of Intercontinental Energy, to join us for her keynote. Alicia is the President of Intercontinental Energy, which is a green fuels developer and investor focused on upstream wind and solar, midstream hydrogen and downstream ammonia. So she should be able to explain a lot of what's going on.
Sorry, I have a very raw voice from speaking too much. And now I'm blind, so we'll see how we go. As she said, I'm Alicia Eastman. I'm the president of Intercontinental Energy. We started about 10 years ago in order to solve the problems that were just outlined by the first two speakers from OECD and from IRENA, and I want to thank both for having me here to speak. When about 10 years ago, my co-founder realized that the cheapest green electrons in the world are found in coastal deserts, and so we looked everywhere we could to see where there was this perfect diurnal profile of lots of sun during the day and lots of wind at night, because that increases the capacity factor. And I'll just give you an example of that. You can see this would be a typical project of ours where you have sun at the exact same time you don't have very much wind and vice versa. And if you can see the capacity factors in the bottom chart, pure solar is getting you to something like 24% maybe. And that's like in a desert. That's not in Germany. That's in a place that has sun every day and a good deal of it. Pure wind, also a very good resource of wind, that is getting you to somewhere in the 40s, 45% maybe. But if you combine them and they are coming on at different times, you can hit a...
Sorry to interrupt, but they can't hear, so could you stand in front of the
sorry.
mics?
If you can combine them, then you get a much higher capacity factor of somewhere closer to 75%, 70 to 75%. That makes a huge difference because whenever you want to use this downstream, generally speaking, manufacturing does not like to be shut down. It likes to have constant energy, and you need less batteries, less storage overall if you just have a flow of energy constantly. So since then, we have started 4 projects. Our first project was the Asian Renewable Energy Hub, which is 26 gigawatts of upstream wind and solar. It can produce 1.8 million tons per annum of hydrogen, of green hydrogen, and about 10 million tons per annum of green ammonia. And that project was in summer of last year. BP joined as an investor and an operator of that project. And they changed the name to the Australian Renewable Energy Hub, so we could keep that lovely acronym that I've been kind of having my tongue trip over for quite some time. Our second project that we announced was GEO. So it's that is the green energy Oman. And that is also a 25 gigawatt project, all built out in stages. All of the projects are very similar. And that we have partnered with the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Oman, the Sovereign Wealth Fund of Kuwait Investment Authority, and Shell came into that project in December, and Shell will be the operator of that project. Our third that we announced is WGEH, Western Green Energy Hub. I lost the acronym battle there. And it is a really unique project because it's quite large. It is about 15,000 square kilometers of land, upon which we have maybe only 4% of a footprint, but you need the entire land to have the turbines be separated. And we have partnered that project with the Murning people. They are the native title holders of the land, and we decided that we wanted to have a more fair relationship with the community than had happened previously with extractive industries like iron ore or any type of mining. So we partnered with the Murnane. They own a percentage of the project. They have a permanent seat on the board, and we have a charter with them so that we don't do anything that can harm their land. And I think it's really interesting that this discussion topic was about sort of the walking, walking towards green hydrogen, because it's a very typical Aboriginal statement. And it's interesting that the word Murnane, which is our partner's name, actually means to listen, to learn, to observe, and understand for wisdom and knowledge. And I think that that's just encapsulates what we've tried to do with all of our projects by listening to all of the stakeholders, by hiring local entities for everything that we can, and by producing a lot of in-country value for these countries where we were putting the projects, so that it is a positive impact not just on the environment, but also has positive socioeconomic impacts. And then finally, we announced SARA. This is where we had a little bit of a, it is an acronym, but you can also say it. And that is a project we announced with Aramco about 1.5 years ago. Saudi's master plan has not come out yet, so it's a bit delayed, but we expect it to be a great project as well. And all of these are, everything I've described, the way that we approach each project is the same for all 4 of them, and any that come down the line. So one of the things that was beneficial about making at scale, obviously economies of scale, we all know that. If you have a huge piece of land, you also can have a cloud in one corner and it's not in the other. So you have an ability to manage the variability. And with a larger project, you also just have more optimization capabilities. And through our work on these projects, through the development, we have established some IP, which we call the P2H2 node, and that allows us to have the absolute most optimized project. We originally had designed an integrated study that showed it seemed the obvious best way to lay out a project, but COVID thankfully gave us a little bit more time to think about it. And we found something that is just so much less expensive to produce, both the hydrogen and the ammonia. And as a Shell and BP, once they learned of this technology and this IP, this approach, they adopted it immediately because it made so much sense. So basically, we are driven by not just building large projects so that we can meet those demand figures that were shown earlier, but also by how we treat the communities. So the CSR, BSR, ESG, all of that is very important to us. We also want robust partners that can actually bring something to the table, whether it is land or it is a actual operating expertise, as in the case of Shell and BP. They have a lot of background doing major projects. And we are uniquely a long-term investor. We are not a land grabber. We are not a flipper before FID. You can see a lot of that in the industry. We are going to be with these projects through FID and forever. And this is how we do that. We are the lead developer and originator. We do find the projects. We find the projects with the absolute best resource profile, and we develop them as a typical wind and solar project, which is when you need to gather all of the data. Obviously, ammonia is a very old process. The Haber-Bosch process is not expected to change dramatically. And then how we use the electrolyzers most optimally is another figure that we have to look into. Then we get secure and keep a major stake in a consortia, depending on what is necessary for each geography. And we maintain that ownership. We don't sell it down by FID. We have a long-term role to make sure that these projects are executed in the best way possible. And that involves managing the budgets, but it also involves managing interactions with the local community and making sure that we actually provide what we said that we would do when we set out on this. So I'll just shortly, this is just a real summary of what all of our projects are. And I guess the only thing that I would point out is we don't believe that hydrogen is a very good energy carrier, ironically. We think that ammonia makes the most sense to be shipping these green electrons then turned into molecules around the world. And part of that is because it's the most efficient, but the second part is that we would like to use the ammonia as ammonia. And we're targeting shipping fuel. So shipping has very few options. I'm sure you've heard a lot about methanol, but that is obviously not a zero emission solution. It still pollutes the ocean and the air. Ammonia can be a zero emissions solution. So no greenhouse gases whatsoever need to occur when using ammonia. So we see that as the best bet for the shipping industry, which is able to make a new vessel in 1.5 to 2 years. Unlike aviation, which would require 15 years plus to have a new aircraft. And I think that these two industries will be fighting each other over the biogenic CO2 because the planes can fly on e-kerosene, and that's about their only option besides biofuels until they have a new aircraft, whereas the shipping can use ammonia very quickly. Within the next couple of years, it'll be possible to have a lot of different companies using ammonia. There already are companies as well. And that's it. I'll end on there because she told me to. But I think it is. I think it can help explain how we get to those endpoints that were described before. We really need to have extremely large projects built out in stages and many more around the world. R4 are not going to cut it. We need basically in every geography. I don't know how to get out of this, so.
Thanks, Alicia, especially for stopping when I asked you to. Could I now ask Dr. Gauthier Mette, who's the Global Hydrogen Lead at South Pole, to come to the stage? She's going to be moderating the discussion on all of the things we've discussed. What do we do? How do we do it? How does it work best? Now, this is the moderated panel discussion, so if you do have questions, do please post them to the panel via Slido. Dr. Mette.
Hi everyone, great to be here and not see you very well, but yeah, I know you're there. So we are going to now invite our panel. Please come to the stage. We have with us Ulf Baumer. He's head of innovation, Innovation Center and Service and Digitalization at ThyssenKrupp Nucera. We have with us today Donald Cannon. He's head of regional representation of Southeast Asia at the European Investment Bank. We have also the pleasure of having Norela Constantinescu. She's head of section and innovation at ENSO-E. We are also joined by Maria Jaén, European hydrogen research leader at EPRI. We have Francisco Maza, who is hydrogen director for Repsol. And then we are also joined by Mark van Stiphout, and he's deputy head of unit for research, innovation, digitalization, competitiveness at DG Energy, European Commission. Yes, I'm very pleased to be joined by you at this panel. So what we're going to do, we're going to discuss many things, but we're going to particularly look at the role of hydrogen in accelerating energy transition, but in particular in hard-to-abate industries. We're going to also look at the impact of electrolyzers on the power system, the balancing role they can play. Then we are going to also look at how we can integrate energy, green hydrogen into end-user sectors, and of course the infrastructure needs. Okay. So what I thought of doing is asking you a general question. So I'll get your opinions on this, and then I will ask individual questions, and in between, if we have a conversation, that's also great. And then we'll close with a bonus closing question if you have the time. I hope we do. So I thought we'll stay, of course, within the innovation theme.
Yes.
But I wanted to ask you, since there are significant needs for scaling up resources and, of course, time, infrastructure, capital for hydrogen projects, what do you think the most important innovation to prioritize? And let's look at the next 5 to 10 years. Even better if we look at 5, but I'll give you the option to look at the next 10 years as well. So what is the best use, in your view, of best use of our resources to scale up hydrogen through innovation? So let's start from this way, and avoiding confusion, let's go that direction.
Thank you. So first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be here. Repsol is in fact really committed to the decarbonization of our activities, but when talking about hydrogen, it's not only that. It has become part of our license to operate. So we are currently working on a number of projects in Spain, targeting around 2.5 gigawatts of installed capacity by 2030. This date is going to be a very critical date for us, because the RMBO obligations are going to be effective, but we don't want to play blackjack around that date, so we have started to promote different projects. We are commissioning our first electrolyzer as we talk. And when talking about how can innovation help us achieve the goals that we have for 2030, I think that basically we're very interested in understanding how the starting up of these first electrolyzers are going to work, so as to learn from these first experiences in the smaller ones and be able to efficiently put into production the next generation of electrolyzers that will help us achieve the goals that we have for 2030. Still, I think that anything we're going to do in between now and 2030 is going to be based on the same technological paradigm. So we are not seeing great advances in technology in this time frame. So I think this first generation is basically a matter of doing things efficiently, learning as quick as possible as we work, and for sure finding the right financing. We've been talking about that right now. There's a funding gap that needs to be covered. So for us to be able to deploy these investments, and in terms of regulation, I would say it's the other way around. We don't want too many innovations to be sanctioned at this moment in time. We need some kind of stability to be able to make final investment decisions. So have some visibility about how the economics of all these are going to work. So I would say it's a matter of learning from the experiences that we are building as an industry, and being sure that we achieve the goals that we have for 2030 in a stable context from the regulatory point of view, and also setting the foundations for the next generation of electrolyzers that will be put into production 2030 onwards.
Yeah, thanks, Francisco. I like how you started this, that hydrogen became your license to operate. I think we should dive into that a bit more. Maria, what do you think should be the innovations that we should prioritize?
So first of all, I would like to thank Irena for inviting EPRI to participate in this panel. So to give a little context, let me start talking a little bit about EPRI. We are a non-profit organization. We are focused on applied energy research and development. We are working with more than 450 companies in 45 countries all over the world. And our mission is to drive innovation to ensure clean, safe, affordable, equitable, and reliable access to electricity for the whole society. So regarding what are the applications that we think that in the next 5-10 years maybe could lead this hydrogen deployment, let me talk a little about the early entry markets. So we think that there are some markets where hydrogen have shown the most promise, and maybe where the deployment barrier seems to be relatively lower, and could help hydrogen to to be developed in a more specific way. So if we look at in the industry sector, there are already some industries that they haven't used hydrogen for a very long time. So what they are trying to do now is replace this natural gas or these fossil fuels that they have been used and use low carbon hydrogen. So we are thinking about chemical industry, we are thinking about refineries and petrochemical, we are thinking about ammonia, last speaker talked about this industry, and also we are talking about the steel industry, for example, that they are now looking how they can replace part of the natural gas that they are consuming right now, and use this renewable hydrogen. This is for the industry side. If we look, for example, for the mobility sector, heavy-duty vehicles seems to be the most promised sector for hydrogen. It's not a question of if we have to use electric battery fuel cells, for example, vehicles, or hydrogen. I think that there's a space for a lot of, the challenge is so huge that there's a space for a lot of different solutions depending on what we need. So for buses, for trucks, for heavy duty, we think that hydrogen could play a key role. And also for maritime, aviation, and railway, also we are working on that in order to understand how hydrogen could play a key role. And just a comment on the energy storage and integration. So if we want renewables to be integrated in the energy system, in the past we are moving from a scenario that there was a very well-defined generators, so we know how we have generated the energy that we use, and there were well-identified end users. So in the past, the energy system looks like we have generators and we have end users and we know how they are connected, but we are moving to a scenario where we are connecting electricity network with natural gas network. The generators that produce it could be end users, the end users could be generators. So we definitely need large-scale solutions for energy storage, and in that sense, hydrogen could play a role. In terms of large scale, we are thinking about above and underground storage. So above could offer us store hydrogen from some kilograms to some hundred of tons, but if we are thinking about large scale storage, we have to think about underground storage, where we can store millions of tons of hydrogen in a single facility.
Okay, but this is still a lot. I will ask you to prioritize as we go on, and don't give me everything you have. We're going to have still an hour to talk about. So yeah, I think what you said about, I think the last point was for me the most interesting, where the system is changing. We're not just producing electricity and leaving it on the grid or gas. We're getting closer to the industry. We're getting closer to the sectors that use it, and we need to learn more about their needs in the sector, and that requires a different relationship and perhaps more partnerships. Yeah, moving on to you, Norella. What do you think, what is your priority, probably also from power sector perspective?
Thank you very much for the question. Because I talked also yesterday, so as a representative of transmission system operators for electricity, the first thing which comes into my mind, it's actually the challenge we will have in Europe for the offshore development. So we have 300 gigawatts only in EU 27, I think. If we add also UK, then we will go to 400 gigawatts in 2050. And I think this is an important element which relates to the deployment of hydrogen. But I have to recognize, as it was said in the morning by Francisco, up to 2030, probably the major driver for the hydrogen will be the use cases of the industry. So you mentioned the chemical, cement, and so on. And probably, in spite of the fact that we would like to have this, what we call the long duration flexibility, so this storage capability which can come from hydrogen in addition to what we have today, the hydro pump storage. So we will just stack this value in the business model. So I suppose that it's going to be driven by the industry. If we will manage actually to look at to avoidance of RES curtailment by 2030, so we estimate that this can be done in a magnitude of 20 to 30 terawatt hour. So this represents 20 gigawatt. Is not a lot, but it is something which can become consistent. We were looking as well in the hydrogen. Of course, we will need the market to enable these investments, so medium and long-term signals in these capacities, taking into account the value stacking dimension for the business models. And what I would like to mention, there is also, when we talk about offshore, I think in Europe the storage capacities in the salt caverns are located in that region. Of course, we can have also in the south, but then there are other solutions. So if I summarize, I link it to offshore developments in Europe. 2030, stacking the value. If we want more, then huge investments are needed. And the storage capabilities, the geological ones are also there more in the North Sea.
Brilliant. I think you've touched upon a few things, but I'm glad you mentioned storage. It's one of the earlier technologies. I think there's still quite a lot of ground to be covered there, especially to bring the cost down. So I hope we have time more to open that up. Over to you, Donald.
Good morning, and thank you very much for inviting us and giving us the opportunity to talk. I'd just like to take a minute to explain my context, or the context of the EIB, which is that we're the investment arm of the European Union. So our objectives are really about, and particularly outside of Europe, are really about supporting developing economies. And we noticed over the past couple of years a very significant uptick in the discussions around green hydrogen at a political level. And certainly in the lead up to COP27, virtually every high-level mission that we had was around green hydrogen. But what accompanied that, up until about 2 years ago, EIB had about a portfolio of around 2 billion euros, which is not much in green hydrogen over the 2 years. Our pipeline this year, and I checked the numbers getting ready for today, is currently 4.2 billion outside of Europe. And most of that is in between Latin America, Africa, and India. So there's been a huge uptake in interest in there. And what we've seen is a jump in scale from projects that are small bus fleets using green hydrogen, some small electrolyzer stuff, but generally in the order of 10 megawatt type scale. In the pipeline now, it's all between 50 and 400 megawatt electrolyzer capacities. Now, none of them have reached FID, and they all consider themselves pre-commercial, or even these big scale, 400 megawatt projects. So the innovation that we're seeing is really broadly around two areas. Probably the more tricky area for us is the grant finance that's needed to support this. So talking to I noticed on a couple of the slides there were comments about blending. So blending some commercial finance from commercial banks, some low-cost finance from DFIs like World Bank, ourselves, Asian Development Bank, and so on. But more importantly, with grants to help drive down the cost of the production of hydrogen. The second area that we see, and possibly can be considered blending as well, is technical assistance. We're seeing most of the interest, in fact, is coming from private sector developers across the regions. And And where the technical assistance is needed is to support the sovereigns, the governments, deal with these guys. So whether it's on the procurement side or on standard setting or certification, whatever, there is a fair amount of technical assistance, but probably on the public sector side that's needed. And the sectors where we're seeing the most interest is in, virtually all of the projects are single site, single sponsor projects. So the value chains are really quite short. So it's one mega sponsor who's able to put in place the energy, the electrolysis, and then the applications. And I think that's, at this stage, that's really quite important. Because as you add more players, more stakeholders, from our point of view, the complexity rises and the risk factors and the cost of capital goes up and so on. So the kind of operations that we're interested in and we're getting are these single site things. And it tends to be around, so far, ammonia, obviously, fertilizer as a derivative of ammonia, and many countries see in the consequence of the events in Ukraine, the importance of fertilizer and developing some kind of independence there. So that was quite interesting. Interestingly, some of the demand that we're seeing is also from steel manufacturers. So some steel exporters are very interested, and that's driven in large part by their demands around sustainability. They're telling me this is an issue for today, not for tomorrow, because it takes them so long to get their processes and everything up to speed. So I think those are the very interesting things. So the innovation for me here that you were asking is around providing the right type of finance at this pre-commercial development phase.
Yeah, that's a crucial point, and for sure blended finance, we need to see more of that. It's still very small. I think you did touch upon the right sectors. Of course, with the fertilizers, it's dual challenge of food security and energy security, so it's playing a big role. But I feel like we're also touching upon something that is like these are very demand-driven. So there are end users that are demanding these products, especially green steel. Let's turn to Ulf. I know you are not from the steel department of the company, but representing Nucera. But what do you think the big innovations are? And also any reflections on steel would be welcome.
Thank you also from my side to be here, to be invited. I'm from ThyssenKrupp Nucera, and we are developing water electrolysis. And of course, our colleagues from ThyssenKrupp, they are in the steel sector, just to say that. What are the next challenges? What are the key innovations? I mean, when we hear all the numbers we need to achieve, that's around 1 terawatt of electrolysis capacity just to replace the gray hydrogen, and another 5 terawatt for the whole hydrogen need in 2050. I think we should all do the steps now to start now. We have less than 1 per mil worldwide of green hydrogen in place, what we need. So the next innovation should focus on technologies which can provide a base load very fast and very quickly. So we heard, of course, that CapEx is an issue, efficiency is an issue, but we need now to focus on technology which are there, that we can ramp up the first gigawatt and maybe 10 or 20 or 100 gigawatt which are there, because otherwise we will not achieve our targets in time. So that's maybe one. So the innovation should focus on things which we can execute in the near future. And the other thing I see is all innovation around the infrastructure. With the gray hydrogen in place, that was all centralized. You have natural gas to a site, you have a reformer, you produce it where you are, and then you have your product. Now it's different. You produce the hydrogen and the ammonia in different places where you need them. You have the hydrogen produced in Saudi, you need them in Duisburg in the steel facility, or you have them in let's say, in Spain or in the Netherlands, but you need them somewhere else. So everything around the infrastructure for energy And for the transport of hydrogen and its derivatives is, I think, also key to start fast and to build up capacities fast. Yeah.
And thanks. That's great that you also mentioned sort of the transport angle. I want to later come back to Maria and ask a little bit about her views on pipelines. But of course, last but definitely not least, would love to also get your opinions.
Yeah, thank you. And also, first of all, thanks to IRENA for inviting me over, and really a pleasure to be here at the Innovation Week. I would very much go with my neighbor, with Ulf, actually. And also, just a bit to say where I come from. So, at EU level, European Commission, you also said it, we've really put a lot of emphasis on hydrogen and building up the use and the availability of hydrogen over the last years with huge amounts of investments, but also big ambitions. So at EU level, the European Commission, we have said that we want basically 20 megatons of clean hydrogen by 2030. 10 of those we envisage to be imported, and 10 of those we envisage to be produced in Europe. And that was basically a step up from what we originally said in the hydrogen strategy, which was only 5 megatons for Europe, but we speeded that up because of the Russian invasion in Ukraine and the fact that we really need to replace much of the gas much faster than we had in mind. So 10 megatons in Europe, let's say 5 megatons could be something around 40 or 50 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity, which is then again the double in renewable capacity. So if we're talking about 20 megatons, that means worldwide something like between 160 and 200 gigawatt of electrolyzer capacity and something like 400 gigawatts of renewables, which is huge. Right, 300 to 400 gigawatts of renewables. So again, like Francesco said, my first priority would be improve the efficiency of the electrolyzers, because between 160 and 200 gigawatts is a big difference. So that's really, I think, the first aim. In terms of how much electrolyzer capacity we need to install, but of course also in terms of how expensive the hydrogen will be, because it's simply still too expensive. We're supporting it big time with the EIB, of course, but also with things like the Innovation Fund. We will get to that later. But I think that basically ramping up the capacity, improving the efficiency to make sure that it is available and it's cheaper is very important. And just to illustrate a bit where we are and where we need to go. Currently, I think, or in May at least, the capacity in Europe and EFTA, so let's say Switzerland and Norway included, and Liechtenstein, but I'm not sure if they have big plans for electrolyzers, is something like 177 megawatt. So it's really an enormous ramp up in 7 years. And I think if I have to say one thing that is a priority, it's that. Make sure that we improve the efficiency, that we build them out, scale it up. And then, of course, when we are looking at that and when we are assuming that hydrogen also in 2030 may not all be competitive, let's say, in the market like hydrogen produced from gases at the moment, we're, of course, looking also at how can we make the transport cheaper, how can we make the uptake cheaper, so then we come into steel and fuels and all these things. But if you ask me one thing, I would say electrolyzers, make them bigger, cheaper, more efficient and all that.
Okay, that's a good point, but I will ask you later, but I'll let you think as I ask other questions. What are the enabling factors, of course, to achieve what you think is important to achieve? But let's go a little bit back to infrastructure. I would really like to hear your views, Maria, on pipeline infrastructure. Do you think we have the infrastructure ready? Is it the same routes as the gas was produced somewhere else and was sent somewhere else? Is it the same routes? Can we repurpose them? Do we need more innovations? What do you think?
Yeah, thank you so much for the question. So, regarding blending hydrogen to existing natural gas pipeline, I would like to highlight 3 main topics. So the first of all is well known and is related to hydrogen compatibility with materials construction. So we are talking about hydrogen embrittlement. So hydrogen embrittlement can lead to fatigue crack growth, potentially leading to failure. So this is something that is not the same. This is for transmission pipeline. It's not the same for distribution pipelines because the pressure is lower and because of the materials that in the transmission pipeline usually we use steel, and in the distribution we use another type of plastics and other materials. So EPRI, together with GTI, which is the Gas Technology Institute in the US, and with more than 54 companies, leading energy companies, we are working in the Low Carbon Resources Initiative, which try to analyze these different energy carriers, what is the role that could play in the decarbonization. And we are now working and we are discussing now these topics about materials. So we are preparing a report that will be published at the end of the year for these LCRI members, reviewing these material issues. A second issue is related to compression stations. So a study that EPRI is completing this year indicates that the centrifugal compressors may need replacement when hydrogen blending is above 20%, 20% hydrogen, 80% natural gas. And for example, reciprocating compressor may need replacement when the blend is more or less 50-50. So we have done this study based on the compressors OEM survey and in equipment performance. A third issue is that hydrogen has about 1/3 the energy content of the natural gas volume, so the density is more or less 8.5 less hydrogen compared to natural gas, and that implies that the velocities will be about 3 times faster in the pipeline. So hydrogen flowing through the pipeline will transport 80% of the energy compared to natural gas. So this is something that we should take into consideration when we are designing this repurposing. And let me highlight another 2 topics. One is the higher velocity of hydrogen is the fourth issue. This means that it will approach the erosional velocity much quicker at a given pressure compared to natural gas. So that means the implication is that you need to space your compressor stations closer than nowadays with the natural gas. And the fifth issue, the last that I would like to highlight, is related that you will lose the benefit of line packing because the hydrogen's lower volumetric energy model shows that you can get 3-4 storage less time of this line packing. So we definitely need, to make some changes in the existing natural gas pipelines if we would like to blend hydrogen. On the other side, just a brief comment on hydrogen have been transported by a specific and 100% hydrogen pipelines. In the past, I think that we started in 1938, something like this, because usually this is a short pipelines that they are connected directly to end users that are using 100% hydrogen. So we have experience also on that point. There are some initiatives, for example, in Europe, the European Hydrogen Backbone, which implies more than 32 transmission system operators that are evaluating how they can repurpose at the European level all their assets in order to see which ones make sense to repurpose and which one makes sense to build new hydrogen pipelines. And at the end, one of the conclusions that they are publishing is that almost 70% of the existing natural gas pipelines could be repurposed for hydrogen blending. The percentage is not clear. It depends on the materials. It depends on how many years that assets have. But for sure, this is a transition, for the decarbonization targets that Europe has established, and blending hydrogen into the existing natural gas network could play a key role.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks a lot also for sharing quite technical details with us. These are interesting numbers you shared, but it seems like there's more to see. How about the role of the grid? So do you think the grid is ready?
In Europe, it's making, I think, a quite good job for the moment. Now, regarding the relationship between hydrogen and the electricity grid, I mentioned, this renewables capacity in the beginning, what, of course, we think that it is coming like important and developing at the same pace with the renewables deployment. It is the vast volume of flexibility. So, of course, there is hydrogen. With this maybe time lapse which will take until they will come also mainstream. I mentioned the long duration capabilities, but indeed they can provide even today, so the technologies which are there, so they can provide the requirements, flexibility requirements, similarly to the batteries and to the demand response. We checked, I think, 3 technologies, and they can provide those services. So frequency control, congestion management, a little bit less, I think, on the voltage control, but it can be used also for that. So. But there they will be in competition with the other solutions. On the longer term storage, I think there, of course, we have hydro pump storage, but this is not sufficient. So there, I think it's a major technology. Of course, we will still need the expansion of the grid, and the grid infrastructure, being electricity or hydrogen, so it has probably the same issues in terms of permitting, in terms of deployment, in terms of also of financing and regulation. I would not repeat maybe what I said yesterday. So there is also the issue of the operation of the grid, because by linking all these millions of assets, so we need to underline once again the use of digitalization. We cannot operate the grid the same way as we did up to now. So of course we use digital solutions, but this will have to be increased, and everything should be automated to have a decision support. And of course, with that comes the cybersecurity. What I will also say, it's the regulatory framework, where we have to have a kind of system perspective and try to optimize as much as possible the use of the assets. So if we have the electricity network, or if we have the hydrogen network, the gas network, so how we make actually these interfaces working together, and how we can optimize the use of the assets in order to have the investments not exploding, because in the end we have to look also at affordability criteria.
Yeah, brilliant. I think you really touched upon that, best use of resources point again there. And permitting. I was yesterday at the German Heavy Industries Klima Congress, and it was mentioned that it can take up to 8 years for a hydrogen plant to be up and running from the start. And I was surprised, and I hope it's not true, but that's what they said. So let's go back to a little bit more the derivatives sector. So of course that requires a different set of infrastructure. So when we look at ammonia and refining, you need also crackers to be able to import. So what do you think on that front? Do you think we are ready? We have the knowledge, innovation, and maybe the investment already, or do you think there's more to be done?
No, for sure, there's a lot to be done. Not only on the technology side, but also on how you're going to structure the value chains for instance, from a contractual or commercial point of view. So this is to be done, and we need to secure the investments, as Donald was saying, in a way. And we are dealing with, for instance, some industries that are not used to, for instance, to long-term contracting, like the shipping industry or some others. So there are innovations all along the value chain and in many different aspects. When talking about hydrogen derivatives, well, the first thing that we always say is that we are producing hydrogen for ourselves. That's the top priority, to somehow decarbonize our activities and transform our industrial activities. But we're also having a look at gaining economies of scale as we do this, and having a look at the potential that Spain has as an export country. And in that respect, we are exploring different opportunities associated to different derivatives. So we are kind of agnostic there. So what we are doing is getting in contact with the market, understanding what the market is interested at, and that's the kind of projects that we are pursuing in Spain. At the same time, we're a little bit worried about grid developments, about the sanctioning of the project, the bureaucracy behind all these developments. So we're also having a look at eventually potential imports to Spain that could take advantage of this low pace of adaptation of the environment in Europe, and in particular in Spain. So we're having a look at projects like the ones that Alicia has explained to us that could eventually bring some derivatives into Spain and compete with our own developments. So in the long run, we see Spain has, and Europe in particular, Southern Europe, Northern Europe with hydro, have a lot of potential to become net exporters of hydrogen using different derivatives. But there might be a window of opportunity for these exporting countries to import a share of their needs if we are not capable of finding the right financing, if we are not capable of putting in place the grid that is needed, accessing the water that is needed for this development, if we're not capable, for instance, of managing the social issues that arise when you start using a big amount of land for these kind of developments in certain communities and certain regions. So although in the long run there will be, I think, net exports from countries like Spain, having a look at, well, from a different perspective to the import of some derivatives. When talking about the derivatives in particular, we are investing in a demo plant, eFuels demo plant in Bilbao. So that's something we're doing. We are investing in an e-methanol project in Tarragona, having a look at ammonia projects as well. So far, we have not taken FID of any of these projects. But as I mentioned, not only interested in replacing the commodities that we market in as of today, but also interested in the commodities or the derivatives that can be used as a means of transportation of hydrogen in the long run, and that can give us these economies of scale and take advantage of the position that we have in Spain.
Thanks a lot. It looks like you are doing your share to explore your role to enable that infrastructure. But hope you get the FID soon and you have the right environment to do so. Let's integrate a little bit the audience questions as we move along. There's one question I think would be great for you. We have been asked about energy colonialism, how we avoid the new era of energy colonialism with green hydrogen. Perhaps you could share your perspective in Southeast Asia or South Asia, what do you see in terms of, how hydrogen is produced and used or exported?
That's really an outstanding question. It was one of the key points I wanted to make this morning, in fact. So thank you, whoever it was. It was really, really lovely. So India is perhaps an interesting case. India was very coal dependent and still is, but it has now the second lowest cost of electricity in the world, thanks in large part to its auctions around solar and wind. And there's about $20 billion worth of new investment going into renewable energy every year in India. And it is now cheaper to produce a new solar plant than it is to generate electricity from solar than it is from coal in India. So I think there's a huge opportunity. In terms of energy colonialism, I think perhaps economies like India are they're up and running. They're doing their own thing. Where I think these kind of risks are true are probably in Africa, sub-Saharan Africa. And the reason we would want to invest in sub-Saharan Africa are probably some selfish ones, some altruistic ones. On the selfish side, Africa, because of its solar and wind endowment, will be able to produce electricity and green hydrogen at a cost that Europe cannot. Perhaps the exception is Spain, southern Spain. But Africa will be able to produce green hydrogen at a very, very low cost. And given the limited economies of scale that are achievable with green hydrogen, it's not like offshore wind, where we saw dramatic falls over 20, 30 years in the price of offshore wind because of improvements in technology, because the height of the turbines and so on that they could achieve. There are probably less opportunities for those kind of economies of scale in green hydrogen. So in terms of achieving the gigawatt scale and the mass of green hydrogen that we want to do, we're focusing on the cost of electricity. And therefore, it's important that the solar-rich countries play an active role in that. In Northern Europe, we cannot ever achieve the cost of green hydrogen that Africa can. In terms of energy colonialization, one of the approaches that the EIB is doing is very specifically looking at the environmental and social outcomes of the projects that we operate in. And we put in place a framework of indicators and periodic measurement by independent organizations on social and environmental outcomes. And in particular on green hydrogen, there are a set of uses around, or a set of issues, I should say, around access to energy and access to water, the two key ingredients for green hydrogen. And so our proposal, and we did a study on this in preparation for COP27, which showed that Africa has a huge potential for the production of green hydrogen. We're suggesting 20 megatons in just 3 hubs, a South African hub, Egypt, and a West African hub. So 20 megatons a year by 2030, and up to 50 megatons a year by 2035. So huge potential. But what we're saying, at the same time as we're doing this, investing in all of this solar and the electrolysis and so on, we should be investing in access to energy and water. And we are making that a requirement on our investment programs, and we will be measuring it. So I think that's perhaps a partial answer to the question. But anyway, thank you for that.
Yeah, it's a good question, not an easy one to answer. We're a bit getting short on time, but we have still some questions here, and I think, it would be good to go still back to technology. I really want to hear from you of why you have chosen at ThyssenKrupp Nucera alkaline electrolyzer. I want to hear about that. If you can answer that briefly, and also mention how you choose your partners. We have a good question from Alicia about oil and gas producers and whether they make reliable partners. You also have a lot of partners, and you probably provide technology to actors like oil and gas majors. So I wonder what's your take on that. But a little bit, if you can tell us about the alkaline technology briefly, that would be great. Before we have the last question.
Maybe to the first question, why we choose and develop and sell alkaline electrolysis. I mean, that's twofold. On the one hand, it's our heritage. We're doing chloralkali electrolysis, which is very similar. You also produce hydrogen by that. For 40 years, we have built 600 world-scale plants or industrial-scale plants with it. Have a combined capacity of 10 gigawatts, so it was an easy choice to build on that heritage and convert this into water electrolysis. The other one is that alkaline water electrolysis is for scale, is made for scale, and you can really build big plants. So we at Nucera, we come from the industrial plant business, so we used to build big plants, And so we are not used to let's say to deal with with cities with smaller consumers of hydrogen, but normally with our peers like from the oil and gas, from other sizable industries. So that was our logical choice to stay in that area, and then alkaline water electrolysis is just the technology to use for this bigger scale. For partnering, I mean, there's always comes something into my mind. So we are in a very, I think, complex challenge now with the energy transition. And I heard one say that the only way to handle complexity is collaboration. So you have to collaborate, especially now for the energy transition. And are oil and gas companies good partners? I think yes, because they also feel the pressure to transfer their business model into renewables. And they are reliable because they are in this business to really produce on an industrial level for decades. So it's not, or they bring the experience with it to develop this project and then to operate the plants for decades, which is just needed. So for us, these are good partners, and these are partners which we deal, let's say, for the last decade. So this is a proven partnership, I would say.
Yeah, thanks a lot for a rounded answer. I will keep my promise and ask you about enabling conditions, but we also have a tough question here, so I'll have to ask that too. The question is around, isn't it better to move industries where solar is cheaper to India or Africa, where energy is cheaper? We know that answer is very complex, of course, but I wonder what the European Commission and the policy regulatory frameworks that you have in mind are doing to keep the industries here, keep the workforce here, or even bring new industries here to make it also a clean tech and innovation hub in Europe.
Yeah. Also a very good question. Let's say the fact that energy prices in Europe are high or are very high and are higher than our competitors is a big source of worry, of course. So this is something that we know is critical to competitiveness of the energy-intensive industry. I think it's of course not the only thing, right? There is the infrastructure surrounding an industry, the workforce, all these things matter as well. But this doesn't change the fact that if you are an energy-intensive industry, then energy prices are kind of your main concern for competitiveness. And this is something that that we in Europe we have always had the situation that we don't have, let's say, that much oil or gas in the ground, or at least not enough, so we're importing. So that's also why we have emphasized energy efficiency so much in all our policies. So that has been and still is one of the cornerstones of our policy. And we see also that the industry, a lot of industry is in Europe because it is able to still be competitive. On the one hand, because of investments in energy efficiency, but also just because of the types of innovation and the type of quality products that the industry produces. I think secondly, let's say the transition to renewables, of course, means that we will have cheaper access to electricity, and I think we realize that once again with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, because then suddenly the cheap gas fell off. And that is also why we have insisted so much on building out the renewables even faster, because that is the cheapest source of electricity. And thirdly, I think we also realize, and I think this is also linked to this question about energy colonialism, let's say the global landscape is changing. Right, the proponents of open trade in the world, or just full open trade, or trade is always good, are less and less. There are less and less of them, and and of course now with the clean or with the energy transition, we see that more and more countries are on the one hand, making big investments in renewables, like in India, but also in the US. We talk a lot about the Inflation Reduction Act as a threat to the EU's competitiveness. But I think first and foremost, it's the biggest. Let's say the biggest news about it is that the US is finally making big steps into investments in renewables. And I also don't think it's a zero-sum game where, let's say, an investment will be done here in the US. The market is expanding big time, but we also see that in the EU we need to be less naive in terms of relying on imports for everything from very few sources. So this diversification of imports, this focus on critical raw materials, for example, and where do we get them? The importance also of having domestic production, domestic manufacturing of parts of the value chain of these clean energy technologies is going to be critical for the green transition and for the Green Deal. So this is getting more and more importance in Europe. Let's say next to all these targets that we have that create demand for renewables, for hydrogen, for clean steel, all these things. Also focusing more and more on the supply side of it. Where is it manufactured, and how can we make sure that it's actually being manufactured in the EU, or some of it? Like with hydrogen, we don't think that all of the hydrogen needs to be produced in Europe, but it needs to be some kind of a fair balance between what we import and what we manufacture ourselves. And of course, we also still are in favor of free trade so that we can supply the technologies also to the rest of the world. But this is going to be, let's say, this is going to be a huge competitive race. But I think, in essence, again, like with the US investing in energy, clean energy so much, it's a race that is good for the world, right? Of course, solar panels all being manufactured in China and having taken over the European industry is a sad case of industrial policy, but it's a huge success in terms of making solar panels cheap and available everywhere in the world. So it's, I would, in this discussion, also warn against too much, one-sided look at the things.
Absolutely agree. Well, thanks to all of you for answering my and audience's difficult questions, more theirs. And yeah, there's a lot more to talk. I had a lot more questions. We still have good questions, but the time is up. I really enjoyed this conversation. I hope we'll have an opportunity to continue during the days following. But yeah, thanks a lot, and we'll continue.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all very much for joining. And as this morning's session was a joint session between IRENA and the OECD, I'd like to ask Francisco Bushell and Deja Sagan to come up and give us a few notes.
Thank you, Felicia. And also from IRENA's side, we want to thank all the panelists and the moderator for really a very interesting and exciting panel. I think I personally learned and enjoyed quite a lot, so thank you so much for that. And a few quick takeaways. I think on technology, we heard that innovation should, first of all, focus on scaling up the technology that we already have available to go really into the gigawatt scale, and at the same time, then continue to improve the technologies. Efficiency is key, not only electrolyzers, but the system efficiency. So that's very important on the technology front. On infrastructure, a lot of uncertainty on the commodities we may be trading, but it's clear that we need planning, and we need to realize that there is a paradigm shift in the previous 1-2 commodities per sector to multi-commodities per sector. On transmission and gas pipelines, we hear about there is still a need to better understand the risks, especially for transmission of blended hydrogen in pipelines, and find ways to mitigate those risks. On electricity grids, we hear that grids are of course available and are there, but we need to optimize those assets, use digital technologies, etc., to improve, let's say, the opportunity to integrate smartly those electrolyzers in the system. In terms of regulation, we also heard about trying to streamline permitting and what is also called bureaucracy. Very important because if there are delays on that side, it may end up in a call for more imported fuels because domestic production may take longer than expected. So for some regions, this might be extremely important. Sustainability was mentioned also. I think most of us 10 years ago would not expect to be talking about today about million tons of derivatives from hydrogen, gigawatt scale plants for electrolyzers, etc. So certainly sustainability is making an effort. And international collaboration also key, and that's the spirit of this conference. So we are very happy that that's also a key point. So now our friend from OECD.
Thank you, Francisco. And I left it to the end, but thank you so much for organizing this together with OECD. I think that was a great opportunity because we were able to bring the innovation on the financing aspect also. So I hope the discussion was very helpful to put things in a bit of a broader perspective and a few points which I took note of from the discussion, that the investment decisions are becoming very complex because of this capital-intensive projects and the existing financing gap. So when we also heard about the infrastructure angle, it even makes it, or it adds another layer of complexity which needs to be resolved, and financing, again, there plays a key role. I think when we look at all these projects that are being announced of different stages, the key number there is that it's less than 10% of everything which is announced is actually turning into final investment decisions. So that's quite worrying for such a sector that is going to be key for net zero emission targets. And then I think the key point that was mentioned is the understanding the barriers, the risks, and developing the right financing solutions to be able to address those risks. There, blended finance, we've heard, which is the strategic use of public finance to mobilize private capital. I emphasize that definition is critical. And then once the de-risking happens, then exiting the market with that financing instrument, because public finance is scarce. And I think it is important to reduce the cost, but as was mentioned, it's also needs to be used very strategically. Technical assistance is key, as we heard. And final word, which was very essential, and thank you for mentioning that, how are we going to measure the social and economic impacts of these investments? So the financing solutions need to also go hand in hand with those. Thank you very much again, and thank you, Francisco, for your attention.
Thank you, gentlemen. And now you're released for coffee. So time for coffee and a chat. I hope you have the chance to talk to the people that you want to. There are 3 sessions after coffee. So we're going to go basically and break things down, look in more detail at different sectors. So if you're interested in decarbonisation of the iron and steel sector, then come back here to the forum. If you're interested in decarbonisation of the chemical and petrochemical sectors, that's in the lounge upstairs. And there's also the Youth and Innovators Hub, which is at the IRENA office, which is just down the road a couple of minutes to our left as you come out of the museum. So I will see those of you who are interested in focusing on iron and steel back here at 11:30. Thank you very much.